So I am a field mouse, not a lab rat. I am constantly outside and probably outdoors more than I am indoors, which I kind of love. But yeah, so we're going to talk about Ohio's bat populations throughout their seasonal annual cycle, but with an emphasis on summer. But it's going to be a little bit scattered, so we have to have multiple pieces of the puzzle to understand the holistic picture with bat conservation and bat management. So I always like to get this out of the way first. I definitely stole this idea from my professor. My professor, Joe Johnson, he couldn't be here tonight. He's got 2 twin boys. They're 2 years old, so we got his hands full. But a lot of this work is made possible by previous lab members whose research has continued to build and contribute to further understanding what we know about Ohio's bats. I definitely have to thank the ODNR pilot, Joe Barber. He's been fantastic, and he's been so kind to help us track bats in the plane, and let me go up in the air with him a few times. There's also so many different landowners in this that wouldn't be fair if I just listed a few, so don't leave anybody out. But there's also a bunch of agencies that help make this possible, including the Department of Transportation, ODNR, University of Cincinnati. We just started doing work this year out in Cuyahoga Valley, so that's been great. And I spent part of my summer in Great Parks down in Hamilton County, but I gotta say, for a quick show of hands, how many of you guys have been to the Germantown Metro Parks? Alright, awesome. Out of all the sites that I've been doing bat work with in Ohio, I gotta say, it's my favorite. Especially the creek, yeah, beautiful. Alright, so we don't really need to show this slide, but who am I? I am a bat biologist. Been studying bats forever. I never thought that I would be studying them, but once I learned about them, it's an addiction. They have so many impressive qualities, and they never fail to amaze you. So, why study bats? You guys think of, well, just anybody feel free to shout out what's a good reason to study bats?
Pollinators.
Yes, pollinators. Cute.
Kill mosquitoes.
Yeah. Yeah, so they have important ecological roles, right? Whether it's pollinating different plants, seed dispersal, and they're thought to be keystone species and biological indicators. So that means the presence or absence of a bat can indicate how healthy an ecosystem or habitat is doing. And the keystone is a part of, if you take bats out of the equation in a habitat, sometimes things do tend to fall apart. Yeah, you guys had some great example on important ecological roles. I am in deep admiration about just the pure diversity of bats. Found all over the world in all shapes and sizes. The largest bat in the world, its wingspan is taller than me, which isn't much, but it's still pretty big. Yeah, they have all these incredible adaptations we're going to talk about. I'll show you guys in a second. And I'm always a big advocate of the underdogs. You know, bats face so many different challenges, whether they're man-made or just based off of reputation. We know there's a lot of fright and stuff associated with bats, and misconceptions with that, but a lot of times it's just encouraging information and knowledge that can make all the difference. So, hitting on the first point, the places you go, it's one of my favorite things with bat research, is you get to go everywhere. I've been really fortunate enough to be all the way up in the sky, helping track bats, on top of mountains, and all the way down in, let's see if that works, little caves there. This is actually a culvert in Alabama under a highway that was amazing, and that's when being short came in handy. And how many of you folks have been out to the Hocking Hills area? Awesome. Also one of my favorite places in Ohio, but we do a lot of research out there, especially in the past in the winter. And yeah, I take you to some great places. So, for ecological roles, you guys already talked about that they're great pollinators, insect and pest control. Another fun fact is, who here likes tequila? You gotta think bats. They pollinate the flower for that. So they serve a lot of important roles for us to me. So for the adaptations and diversity, there are over 1,400 species of bats around the whole world, and this is constantly changing and going up and down throughout the years by a couple numbers. They're actually the second largest order of mammals. You guys have any guesses what's the first?
Humans.
Not quite. They're small. Rodents, yeah. Okay, so talk about the cool adaptations to that. Another just fun random fact that I can't get over when I first learned this, but there's actually bats that have the ability to catch fish, frogs, other bats. That is supposed to be a small little fish. If not, there are those out there. There's actually some bats too that they have the ability to handle salt water, which is amazing. And a lot of medical research supports with bats, especially these little guys here, under the vampire bats. And we do not have these in Ohio. They're not coming for you, don't worry. But they are incredibly social and have an unbelievable population care for each other. They will look after each other. They will actually, kind of gross, but also really neat, will bring blood to another bat that hasn't left a roost, whether it's sick or it's just tired, and will keep that bat going. It doesn't have to be related to it, which, there's some gross parts to that, but it's also really cool that it's a collective caring for each other. So, talk about
How do they transfer blood? They gotta ask.
It's,
How?
yeah, it's like blood kiss. So if you guys ever get the chance to go to now next year, probably the third, the Bat Fest. It's in Ohio, or Columbus, we're in Ohio. It's hosted by Jerry Carter at OSU. He does a lot of research with vampire bats, and I believe he has his first captive population now. So it's really exciting. But we talked about all the cool stuff with that. Now we're going to get into a little bit of the doom and gloom side. So unfortunately, our bats in North America, specifically more of eastern U.S., they're not doing too hot. That's from a handful of different problems. You guys name a few or guess?
Pollution.
Pollution. I'm sorry, what was that?
Fungus.
Yeah, so that's the big one. Yeah. One more big one. So climate change definitely could be one. Development. Have you guys ever seen the big structures out on the plains? Windmills. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of bats run into those. But talked about a fungus, and that fungus is the biggest contributor to population crashes of our bats. Specifically, it spread through the East Coast and is now trickling down to the western part of the U.S. Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk specifically more about white nose because that's an important factor that contributes to a lot of reasons why we do our research. So white nose syndrome is the disease that we call when bats are affected from it. It originally came over in the winter of 2006, 2007 out in New York. So this was believed to be an accident from cavers, and it's believed to have a Euro-Asian origination. And so if that's out in Europe and Asia, where this disease has been existing for thousands of years, have also had the ability to adapt for thousands of years with the fungus. The problem with North American bats is they have not. And this is a fungus that thrives where bats hibernate. They like does really well in their winter sites. And it's a problem because that is a very vulnerable time for bats. And unfortunately, we had huge population crashes of bats, upwards of 95% or more for a lot of species. This is millions upon millions of bats, so it's pretty devastating. But rather than just tilt our heads down and give up, we choose to emphasize our research on bettering these remnant populations that still exist. So right now, we like to say that we are in the post-white-nosed era. That doesn't mean that it's gone. It's just we are past that mass mortality phase. And a lot of our bats, you don't see this fungus that originally you could see it on their muzzle, it's white, but doesn't mean it's not there. It's still prevalent, usually to the appearance of much anymore. So just a little bit more about white nose. It's a gossamer fungus. The lovely, fun name that I butcher every time. So we're just gonna call it PD, because that's what we like to say. If they have a fungus that's PD positive, PD negative. And so what this does for bats is, in the wintertime, they said their bats are extremely vulnerable. So bats will go into torpor, which is like hibernation, but torpor bouts, they have to wake up, whether it's a couple days or a couple weeks, whether they have to come out and stretch. Their wings would just move around, and the problem with white nose is that it causes more frequent arousals. So more frequent arousals is going to deplete all their fat reserves. There's no insects this time of year. It's also going to dehydrate bats, and you can see some types of wing damage, whether it's holes or tears, and you notice a lot of erratic, random behavior of winter bats. Now, it doesn't harm humans, but one really cool thing you can see if you have a UV light, you hold a bat wing out there, you can actually see the fungus, and it glows different colors. So, just to show you the spread, this lovely map, the origination is in New York, dark colors. You can see it starts trickling and going further and further out west. If you guys want to monitor this yourselves, it's the white nose syndrome.org. They always provide consistent updates, which I like to stay away from because it makes me sad. But why do you guys think white nose spread this particular way? So migration is one. It's a big part of it. Bats spreading it amongst themselves, peoples. But what in particular is this? Yes, mountain ranges, which equal caves. So you can see able to spread throughout this whole cave system, the Appalachian, and trickling out west. Okay, we're going to take that map off now. So, how does white nose syndrome shape our work? The post-white nose world is vastly different. I always hear, I came into bat research in the South right as white nose syndrome was really starting to impact the areas down there, and as a new or novel bat biologist, you will always hear the older bat biologists going on about how it would rain bats from the sky. Fortunately, we don't see that as much. But our goal is to extend our knowledge of Ohio's remnant populations. This applies to several species, and we're going to break down the phenology and the life cycle of each species in order to understand the holistic picture for bats. And since about 2016, our lab has done a lot of research on winter populations of bats in Ohio, and I got to be a part of some of that, which is really fun. And we have a lot of gathering of intel information, whether it's historical records, acoustic data, which I'll show you guys later, and the winter work makes it possible to transition into other seasons. And so winter work is more ideal as a starting point. Bats aren't necessarily, they're not moving as much. That's when they're in their bouts of torpor, and they turn into just little batsicles. And so it's really fun. You'll see in a second the cool things we get to do with that. But just to break down the annual cycle of cave hibernating bats, we say cave lightly because cave, we don't have a lot of caves in Ohio. So in the wintertime, that's when you're gonna have bats hibernating. They're going through torpor. And that's what we've had our emphasis on research the past couple of years. But it's spring, summer, and fall. We need a lot more data. Now, spring is when bats, they start to arouse more from winter. They can still be in their winter sites, but they're gonna start fattening up, get ready to migrate. And females, for a lot of these species, actually store sperm throughout the entire winter and wait till the spring to fertilize that. So that's incredible and questionable method because you think that requires a lot of energy, and that's pretty neat. And so spring migration is thought to be very direct type of movement where they're not gonna have so much stopover sites. Plot twist is we're figuring out that's not the case. I was fortunate enough to actually traveling back to a bar one night. So I made it there at 2 a.m. I think just in time for last call, and thought there's no way that's a roost, and yeah, it was just a stopover site. So I don't know what was on her mind. But so after the spring, they're gonna transition and arrive to their summer maternity sites. Now, for females, this is when a lot of them group together and they give birth to young. Typically, it's about one pup, but there are a lot of species that can have multiple. Big browns are one, as well as red bats. And red bats can have up to 4, which is very impressive, especially for how tiny they are. So, a lot of the work that I do throughout my whole PhD, and we're not going to get into every single bit and piece, is the emphasis on these 30 seasons. And so we're going to start backwards and work our way throughout the seasons. So we have spring we're going to focus on next. But let's talk about first our target species. So we have the northern myotis, which happens to be my favorite, it's almost the longest. It has been bumped up to federally endangered. It's been threatened since 2015, but just got bumped up. The little brown bat should be, but is state endangered. And we have the tricolored bat that is going to get bumped up. It should have been in September, but it's been delayed as endangered. As well as the Indiana bat that has been federally endangered since the 70s. And then we have these are one of the bigger bats in Ohio, big brown bats. Now, big brown bats aren't as affected by white nose because they're a little bit bigger. There's thought behind that. They have a lot more mass head. They're very, very durable and unique. But these other species are heavily affected by white nose. Now, Indiana bats, like I said, since the 70s, they've been listed. And a lot of the reason behind their population crashes is because these guys, anybody take a wild guess what's the Dallas means? I'm expecting that. Dallas is companion. These guys roost in extremely tight, big clusters, and it's in a very high concentration, usually a handful of caves, primarily down by Kentucky. The problem with that is they have a disturbance in the wintertime. You have bats in that concentrated area. They're disturbed, population crashes. But particularly these 3 on the left have been heavily affected by white nose. And we can do a lot of work with that. And so just to give you guys an idea of the size of bats. Keep going.
Oh.
Okay. So he's a little dried out.
It might smell a little bit in there.
All right. A little bit dried out has shrunk because that's what happens. This is big brown bat. We'll pass around in here, but this is one of the bigger bats that we have in Ohio. And when they are actually dehydrated, about the size of my index finger and like, they have really, really big, white, shiny teeth, which always amazes me because they're brilliantly white. But we will start here, pass it around. Now the other little bag in there is the skull of little brown bat. It's important to note that big brown and little brown bats, common names are a nightmare for bat research. Little browns are more related to northerns and Indiana bats, not big browns. But it's important to note too that all these bats, they have slightly different ecologies that, roosting ecologies that really, really make a difference. Which would be important because they're threatened, they're a species of conservation need. And so we need to understand what they are using for their habitat and roosts. And one more fun fact, so most of these species, we're gonna ignore big browns for a second, but northerns, little browns, and Indiana bats, northerns and Indiana bats are primarily cavity roosters. Indiana bats, they love big, old, dead trees with exfoliating bark that look like they're just about to fall over in a second. Northerns, I like to joke around, they are the garbage bat because they pick anything for roosting, which is kind of fun, especially when you're tracking them. You never know. A lot of other species, you can point your tracker or your receiver at them, and you know that's the roost. But northerns, it's always a fun game. I actually tracked one in the log before and thought there's no way he was in there. But tricolors are unique. You can see they look a little orange here, but it's more just be like a light orange brown. They call it tricolored because there's 3 different color beds in their fur. But these guys are one of the smallest bats. They can weigh between 4 or 5, sometimes 6 grams. They're so stinking tiny, but they roost in the foliage of leaves, and it's thought that they're supposed to look like dead leaf clusters. It's really cute. I'll show you guys in a second, but how we catch them in the summertime. We always like to say they look like little chicken nuggets. It looks like just chicken nuggets are in your net. But little browns are unique because they roost in buildings. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but we did not know where any roosts were for little browns post-white nose syndrome before we started doing research trying to find them in 2021. Okay, so we're gonna work our way backwards with what we started with. So originally, my lab has done a lot of work with winter. So if you just have a hankering to read and study that work, be on the lookout for these. I think they're published to their recipe. But Lucy Williams, she's done a lot of acoustic work throughout fall, winter, and spring. And with acoustic work, I don't know if
You want to show that now?
yeah.
Okay, Aaron.
So with acoustics, there's different forms of these little guys. These pick up the echolocation, which we can identify by species or relatively close.
Yeah, I hate that one.
So this is the smaller ones, which you guys can actually buy, and it's really fun to use.
Okay.
Okay. And so bats echolocate on an ultra high frequency. Fun fact, jingle your keys.
Might need to walk around a little bit with it.
Not sure if it'll, I can kind of walk around.
So what is it?
So that picks up the echolocation calls of bats. And through a lot of programs and stuff, you can analyze their calls. It's not a complete, perfect science,
Right.
but you can narrow in on what some species are. The tricky ones are myotis. A lot of their calls they overlap with red bats that are common bats, but it definitely helps.
So when Aaron is shaking those keys, those keys shaking is making sounds that we can hear, right? We can hear those keys jingling, but they're also emitting higher frequencies that we cannot hear. That's what the device is picking up right now to demonstrate that if we walked outside and these bats are flying around sending out echolocation signals to navigate as well as catch food.
See indication.
Yeah, we can not only see that they exist by that, but that device will actually, through an algorithm, through lots of time and researchers painstakingly spending time outside figuring things out, that device will identify them with a pretty good degree of certainty too.
What do they call that one?
So that's called an echometer. If you just look up acoustic detectors.
I'll send you guys the link in the email after we close. Unfortunately, they don't make them for Apple products anymore, but you can. It's like $200, which is cheaper than a video game system if you want to get kids outside playing with bats. Not playing, but hearing them. Yeah.
Fun tools we play with. And my old lab mate Levi, he's been working for the Game Commission, did winter research that we looked at the traditional hibernacula for bats, caves, mines, tunnels, things like that. And we actually had to go in and survey, he compared and looked at temperature and elements like that for what bats prefer in below ground. But he also had work in above ground sites, which is really cool, somewhat new concept. There's a couple other papers and researchers that have done this work as well. But we have these above ground sites, which you guys are in Hocking Hills, just occasionally look up at some of these rock shelters in the wintertime. You can see bats, primarily big brown bats with this. And we do see our handful of tricolored bats, and you get to go to some really cool places doing this. And it's gorgeous, especially in the Hocking Hills area when you have the waterfalls that are frozen over and you get to crawl around in those looking for bats. But this research that my lab mates had done have given us a start where where some of these populations are. Now for little browns in their traditional habitat, we have very few sites, less than 10, the whole biggest populations actually, for Ohio. So, transition to, where do I come in with this? Okay.
Can I interrupt you just while you're in the middle? I know your two questions. I'm confused. Like when I think of bird migrations, I think of very, very long
Yeah.
migrations. But is that the case for bats? Because I mean, if they're living in caves in cold climates,
Yeah.
when summer comes, they really don't have to go very far, right?
So it's very mixed, and the whole migration, swarming, we call spring, sometimes it's called spring emergence or spring staging. It's not really understood, and it's very mixed results. You can have bats that go 2 kilometers. There's been cases though of bats like the Indiana bat that went from Pennsylvania all the way to Kentucky.
They went south. Or
Yeah, so they
south.
don't have a uniform direction north and south. It's everywhere.
Okay. So it's not really driven by bug population and flower population?
No, because so in the winter, they have torpor that get into basically ambient temperature of their hibernacula, but there's no insects. So it's important for them to go into torpor for that. But in the summer, the big drivers when they're giving birth is they want it very, very hot. And so a lot of times when they're trees, buildings, things like that. And I tell you, addicts roast you, but bats seem to love them. But it's just a different thermo-regulatory requirements for them. Yeah.
But don't we have true migratory bats and then we have hibernating bats too, right? Like the
So
evening-
that term's it's a little blurred. I just collectively we blend them together because originally a lot of that emphasis is on the bats like red bats or hoary bats or silver-haired bats. But we're finding out it's pretty mixed. Some of the work that we'll be doing later is we're actually finding red bats staying in Ohio for the wintertime instead of migrating. And yeah, it's just mixed and scattered, which is really fun and also makes you want to bang your head against the wall when you try to study them. Yeah, it's scattered information. Just makes me want to study more though. Okay, so for summer work, with a lot of my previous lab mates work, we're able to have an idea of a starting point, start at winter. And one of the goals here is we want to find more summer populations of these remnant species, which includes tricolored northerns and Indianas. This is primarily for trees. And we also want to connect these back to winter sites or connect them throughout Ohio. One of the things we do is bat jewelry, but bands on the forearms of bats. And then towards the very end, we're going to mention buildings and how you guys can, if you want to do some citizen science. Okay, so for the migration efforts, like I said, spring to this transitionary period from their to their summer colonies, and this takes place about mid-March to mid-April. It's not one immediate event. It can vary by species, vary by sex, and it's not all in one night. It's going to be spread out. And so, like I showed you with the acoustic records, that also helps us figure out where some sites are, if there's presence or absence of some species. You look at historical records, but also word of mouth. And one of the really great things with Germantown is they had a bat blitz a couple years ago. A bunch of bat biologists came, nerded out, and captured bats all over Germantown, which is a great study site for some of my work for some bats. And so the species target here, it should also say northerns, but it's browns, tricolored, and northerns. And this is the fun part that I love. So this is the an airplane that is piloted by a DNR pilot, Joe Barber. It's awesome. And when we capture bats, we will place a transmitter. I'll show you better pictures of those in a second. But you place them on in between the shoulder blades of a bat. They don't last that long compared to other species of animals. Maybe you can get 3 weeks if you're really lucky. You are a northern long-eared bat, they like to drop them the next day sometimes. But this little antenna here is what I use to pick up the signal of this transmitter, which is also called a tag. But it woo! I'm excited. But it's picked up that receiver, and you hear a very, very obnoxious beep. And so we have a couple of methods for that. There's me losing my mind, chasing them by foot or by car. We've been very, very fortunate that ODNR has actually been helping us with this. Since 2021, we spend a lot of our springtime with me texting the pilot and seeing him zoom around at night chasing the bats. And so, one of the great things with this, it's a little bit of a spoiler, but blue brown migration. So this is in 2021. This is in southeast Ohio. You can see this highlighted area. What is one thing you notice just with the red box that might be good for bats?
The overhang.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Opening right under the
Yeah, the overhang and then the deck.
Yeah, you see it gets a lot of solar exposure. And so that is, we'll skip some of the details, but that is originally the only little brown return colony that we knew about in 2021. It was from telemetry by plane, and me going insane. But just little details on that site. We had a female that we captured on August 6th. We were out the whole night, we were chasing her, and she didn't go that far. approximately a couple of kilometers, but just to show the importance of an emphasis of conservation for this. We were very fortunate for this building is state-owned. It's a marina, it's an office building, and it had plans to be demolished. And we didn't know anything about this roost. And the folks on the ground, they knew about it. It was just an occurrence. But talking to them, communicating, it was a really great effort through us, ODNR, and the marina folks. They are contributing to a lot of research that we're currently doing, and we're slowly trying to transition and provide other habitat for those bats to trickle out before the building would get taken down. And quite literally, bats are coming out of the wall here. I could not believe that. That bat is fine. Okay. And so for the maternity, colony killer brown bats, it's only about 17 kilometers. And I haven't added 2023's data yet, because I freshed it out of the field. We had another migration where a bat only traveled 11 kilometers, it's like relatively short. And this isn't in here, but for a lot of the fall work I do, we actually captured a bat that went about over 90 kilometers. Really exciting, that's the biggest one or distance we have.
So how will you move the bat colony?
So you just provide alternative habitat or alternative roosts for them.
Okay.
And so we've been slowly putting in bat boxes, and also the timing when we would, if they did demolish the building, the timing is very important to not do it in the summer when pups are being born.
Right.
Yeah, there. Oh. Okay. So for the tricolored bat, this is one of the smaller bats. They don't go too far at all. And we were able to track a female, just a short distance of 5.7 kilometers, but this was originally from the hibernacula. It was on state land, and unfortunately it opened up a whole new world for summer work to occur. And we found a plethora of roosts for other species as well. So we're slowly building, putting pieces together to understand. Yeah.
So, you said it was 5.7 kilometers after you tagged it.
Yeah.
Do you have any indication how far it may have traveled before you tagged it?
No, so when we tag them, it's, I'm holding the bat and then we release it and we have it chase it, but that measurement is it's direct distance. So there could be more, could be all sorts of patterns the bat's actually doing, but it's just the most linear line of movement.
I guess I'm asking is when you tagged them, when you captured the tag them,
Mm-hmm.
is it at a roost site or something, or is it you just happen to put it, that's it,
Yes,
they're
these are-
migrating through that area?
So these are at their hibernacula, where
Okay.
they're emerging out, and then I hold them until the pilot comes overhead, and then it's kind of fun, because you feel like it's I always joke that it's my Super Bowl. Just release the bat and all hell breaks loose. Or some brake pads off guard. But yeah, so like a lot of this data, well, there's a lot of work and dedication to it, and a lot of efforts. What you're rewarded with pays off, and makes a big difference. But how much energy is put into it, we got to explore other options. Which, yeah, yeah, I'll show you in a second. So there's two different methods. There is in the summer, mostly mesh netting. There's also harp trapping that we do at the entrances of their hibernacula. So much more fun than this netting. It's just a lot less work to put them up, and it's basically two lines of fishing line that are offset from each other. And the bats will come in and think that, oh, I passed this one, and they hit the other one, and they just fall down into this little bag that's lined with plastic, and they just kind of all hang out there until you go in and grab them. But in summer, we put out mist nets, which the fun parts of those. So for the tricolored bat, we ended up tracking all the places it went to. This is the foliage roosting bat. This giant smat that's about to tip over. covered in a second. So bats are always making you shake your head or, okay. But we found plenty of other roosts and we're able to capture a lot of bats based off of this lead. Okay, so we did the migration stuff, and we're gonna talk about summer work, how we capture them in the summer. So these are called mist nets, and the thread is about as thin as the sewing thread on your clothes, and bats will fall into that. We like to put them between like foraging corridors, ideally. So what's never happens, you want to have, which is pretty cool. You like to have the canopy covered, but we target sources like puddles of water, or it could be a pond where bats are flying in there. Nothing breaks your heart more when you set up these for hours and maybe you'll catch one or two bats. But you gotta keep trying. But that's just the post by your nose squirrel. So those transmitters are showing, telling you about earlier, a better photo of them. But there's also a little line that comes out of those. And so once we get a bat, if it's the target species, I put the transmitter on that. You can see the wire here. We also put bands on specific species, and for bands, those are provide a unique ID. So they usually say ODNR, and then I think it's a 5 number combination. And so with that, we're able to recapture a bat, see how much distance it traveled, what populations are connected. You can also get really cool data. This was actually maybe in Canada, but you guys guess what's the oldest age from the brown bat?
10 years.
So it's either 42 or 43. Yeah, this is definitely likely an outlier. It's usually between 10 and 20 years, but 42 years old from the landing study. That's where some of my fall work actually comes into play too. I do a lot of landing. Okay, and we also collect other measurements. Forearms is important for identification and things like that, which is what I'm doing with these little calipers.
So you just glue the transmitter on the bat and then it just falls off in
Yeah,
24 to 2 weeks.
yeah, it can fall off. It can drop in days, depending on the species, depending on like if they're roosting together and grooming each other. Humidity definitely plays a big factor with them, and also the type. You're only allowed to use specific ones of like surgical glue, putty, and there's some brands that I don't prefer. So yeah. Okay, so big stuff. And all this greenery looks familiar. This is out in Germantown. One of the primary things we do with these summer tree roosts is we collect a suite of habitat data. And that can be anything from measuring the height of the tree, the solar canopy exposure, how much bark is remaining, the distance to the next dead tree, how cluttered is the surrounding habitat, things like that, that we like to do a statistical analysis and look for which variables bats are selecting. And so normally when this is done, it's species by species, and given habitat management, you kind of make you pull your hair out when there's a bunch of different species. My world is all bats, but there's a lot of other considerations for other species as well. So one of the goals here that I'd like to do is not only do the individual species recommendations, but also try to look and see if our data for these 3 tree roosting bats, if there are any roost or habitat characteristics collectively to help management recommendations that would consider all 3 of these species. And this is so exciting to me because I hadn't seen Indiana bats for years when I came up to Ohio, and Germantown's one of my favorite places. Okay, we've covered the maternity season, the different roosts we have here. One interesting thing we're not going to get too much into is tricolor bats are really unique. They're don't just roost in trees, but we find them in caves and rock shelters. Okay, so, and like I mentioned, for our banding studies, one element that we're gonna just briefly mention is from the fall to summer, I will, with the bands, try to connect these populations across the transitional seasons. And now one big thing left out is, what about buildings? You know, we can't just talk about tree roosting bats and leave out buildings. That's one part of the puzzle, not considering the other side, which is very important. Okay, so when I say buildings, I'm just collectively basically saying any anthropogenic man-made structure. Whether it's a bat box, building, barns, a shed, roots on an outhouse, there's gazebos, basically any man-made structure. This is a fundamental new part of our research when we recognize that it's important to return these colonies for species like little browns, where we don't have a lot of information, and big browns, where they're blended in buildings, and that's a bunch of big browns clustered together. You can see here, this is actually a big brown pub. It's on a little linen cloth, but one of the things here I want to do is something similar to our tree analysis, where we look at characteristics. Buildings, it's going to be really tricky to collectively, analytically compare all of them. There's so much diversity. One thing I want to do with that is microclimate studies. Buildings probably have a lot more variation than trees. As well as do studies with pup mortalities and recoveries. I think buildings and bat boxes, there's a lot of information out there on placing bat boxes, but a lot of times people don't know where to go, or it's not been tested. So that's one thing I'm interested in doing. And the big underlying thing for this is we essentially want to build a platform and a network for our Ohio bats and our Ohio bat carriers. Basically stakeholders, doesn't matter if it's public or private, if you're a landowner, you have bats, care about bats, we want to build a platform. So like I said, it's going to be emphasis on man-made structures. Of course, there's going to be research involved of it, but one of the underlying things here is to provide a platform where the people are given back their data. You can see trends in populations over time. Imagine that we can look at the whole state, people participating in counts of bats exiting. You can do it throughout the whole state. Or you can log on and you can see how your bat populations do across the years, and then with weather. We also want to have some places where you can provide all the resources people might have, a discussion board, things like that. And one of the other fundamental elements behind it is trying to find more little brown sites. We've been fortunate enough to find 6 out of like there's over 200 leads we've gotten. But if you guys have bats in your buildings, if you know anybody that does, I'll show you guys the email in a second, but my novel attempt at a logo will be much prettier on the road. But this is something of interest. Give a look out. ODNR has done a lot of advertisements or flyers for us. You'll see my professor's name. And even down the road, something we'd love to do is we have a bat box program where we can provide bat boxes to help address issues. Because I love bats, but I don't love bats in my kitchen. And they're just addressing issues that people might come across. I think it's important to look at both sides. There's a lot of citizen science too that we want to emphasize and start up there. Okay, so there's a lot of different stuff, a lot of cool stuff we're doing, and I thank you guys for all your patience. If you would like the email, it's baps@uc.edu. With that being said,
Erin actually,
Yeah,
she has a.
if you wanna show them a little bit, we've got some, so we have this for demos. We have it for not bat size, obviously, much larger, but. Might be too close.
That's what I do all summer to lose my mind. You hear these beeps when you're in the shower, anywhere. Yeah, one of the fun things we're doing with this is we're doing it with drones too. Yeah, but yeah, you get the bearings, and sometimes the beeps are lower, and it's really, really quiet. Oh, found her. Yeah, these are really fun.
So the bats go back to their same roosting spot? I mean,
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay.
Now for like the transition for the maternity sites, usually they go to the same place. Doesn't necessarily mean same roost. A lot of species have they call it fission fusion network, where there might be one central roost, and then there's a bunch of different ones scattered in there. And then you get some that are just boiled in one roost.
And then how do you attract bats to your bat box?
So that's one thing, we're looking at too, we want to look at with this building program. Because there's things like people recommend, well, they used to recommend putting guano, but it's important to know, and not a good idea, because guano can carry the white nose fungus spores, and there's temperature ranges where the spores can still be viable. There's also recommendations, like if they're in a structure you already have, to use a piece of the wood or material of that, put it in a bat box. But there's not a lot of research about that, which is something we're hoping to explore.
And then how do they really find them? They just use their echolocation, they find a spot, and
Yeah,
they can't tell that it's a warm spot, or can
yeah. So the image shown here, this is built by the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and the reason why it has different colors is it provides a temperature gradient. Because there's thoughts that bat boxes might be a death trap. I personally think mortalities they tend to happen anywhere, but it's one reason why I want to do a pup study in buildings versus bat boxes and things like
Right.
that. But yeah, it's essentially, I like to tell people, it's like you walk down a subdivision, and for a bat, all of that could be an option. It's kind of the Goldilocks effect that I've heard sometimes. What's right? Now it can also depend on the elements. Like if it's a really cold summer, they might go somewhere that's just slightly warmer, and they might get more exposure. Or if it's time to have pups, they're in that phase where they just give them birth. The pups can't fly right out of the get-go, so they might need to be very, very warm. Humidity is also a thing. But yeah, there's a lot to be learned, which I think is cool, but yeah, sometimes it makes you beat your head against the wall. My thought behind bat boxes is it doesn't hurt to try. And if you build it, they might come.
On the picture before this one, are you guys like find that in Germantown and lean to and you're out high-fiving all over the place after this? Or is that just a modest population of gathering of bats?
So this is, I think, actually just north of Dayton.
Well, I'm just saying, is that a lot, or is that a little, is that?
That's a lot, yeah. I'd say, well, there's other sides of that building too. That's just one section of them. And they can squeeze into all these little cracks or crevices, but I think anything 50 or more is a big population. But, out west, there's some species, and they can get up to thousands, which would be a dream for me.
If over 95% of the bats have already disappeared,
Yeah.
and the fungus is still in the caves and in the trees or wherever they hibernate to, it doesn't sound like it's gonna be long before all the bats are gone.
So it's mixed. There's starting to be some studies that show that there's some type of selection going on where they like to emphasize it's thrifty female hypothesis and also some fat bat hypothesis that the fatter bats survive. You know, and that's just a course of selection where we're starting to see those numbers, where the fatter bats are surviving more. But and some hibernacula in other states, they are starting to go up, but it's not going to be like the same as it was, because there's millions and millions that have died. It's not going to balance out for a long time if that were a possibility.
If we have lost that many bats, what is the ecological impact?
There'll be a lot.
Of you know, what is it though? I mean,
Yeah.
what have we lost as a result of losing the bats?
So, insect populations, those can get out of control for a lot of them, but also you have elements of climate change that also affect that. But just holistically, the quality of habitat, it's a trickle down effect. You know, you can have insects that maybe those bats consume, and those bats are no longer there. Now that those insects population gets out of control, it might modify the habitat. It can be like a cascading effect.
I was surprised when you listed the wind turbines as being a problem. They move so slowly, and I thought bats had, were able to avoid something moving that slow.
So they've tried, but there's a lot of hypotheses behind this. None have been solidified, like true reason why they do it. But some people think that it's the highest structure in the surrounding area, so they might assume that's a tree. You can get caught up in, there's some kind of air draft with that too, but there's actually a lot of jobs where they have biologists just go around these wind turbine sites and pick up dead birds and bats because somebody hit them.
What they're finding is their lungs are collapsed because as they fly through, they're not hitting the windmills, but the windmills are creating a pressure differential between the front and back, and they go through, and then their lungs get collapsed. Yeah.
That makes sense.
I have no idea how true this is, and I think it's a statement about birds, that if you paint one of the tines of the windmill, like a color that's easily visible.
Yeah.
That at least for birds, it can help that.
Yeah, I know they've done some experimenting with, I think, the light and the speed of the windmill. I will say that's a little bit outside of like my wheelhouse. I'm not well informed about that. But you know, where I grew up in Illinois, going back there, all I see is a sea of red blinking lights at night. It's unfortunate too, because you know it's a means to have a good source of energy. It's a shame that there's negative impacts for it too. But you never know, maybe we can come up with something. Yeah.
What's it like when you catch one of the bats and you're doing the translator thing? Are they like freaking out, or are they like whatever?
So it depends on the time of year and species. You get a tricolored bat, which is the smallest one, that big. If you get them in the winter, spring, or even fall, they're very, very torpid and super easy to handle. Really calm demeanor. And if you get big browns and little browns, they're very feisty. Yeah, so those we wear, ironically, batting gloves and then a latex glove over it. They love to chomp. Yeah, but it's amazing. They are primarily beetle consumers, and they have just like the whiteness of their teeth make a dentist jealous. So yeah, it totally depends. My least favorite to handle is big browns. That's because they're aggressive. Yeah.
So if you go into a cave or go into an underground and use an ultraviolet light and see that there's white nose NWS, do you clean it off? Do you do you have a way to kill it? Do you have a way to
Yeah, so
remedy it?
there's been a lot of efforts for white nose treatments. Treatments is said lightly. And a lot of that research is still taking place. But it depends on the site and area, because you might have a control where you don't want to do anything, and then the one where maybe you're bringing in or introducing a type of treatment for that site, but just taking the photos is a good way to monitor how much growth there's on there. Yeah.
Have you guys brought in, you said the European bats and also Asian bats are genetically dispositioned that it doesn't bother them because they've had it for 1,000 years?
Yeah, it's acclimated.
Acclimated. Have they checked, you know, what difference in the blood or, you know, something like that?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I know there's been a lot of research with that element. I think it was accidentally brought over by recreational cavers. They just trafficked it with their feet. Went over to a cave in New York, and then all hell broke loose.
And that gives you the reason why you don't care. It's as simple as that.
Is there anything like we can do as a community to help keep the spores down or do anything at all to be more conducive to the bats instead of this fungus?
Yeah, I would say don't go to caves. Which is so hypocritical to that biologist. But if you are going like across the US, definitely make sure clothes are clean. The White Nose website actually has some really good recommendations, and we do things like we have to decontaminate our gear that we use to capture bats, and we certainly wouldn't bring the gear we use in the east in areas in the west that haven't been affected. Kind of like Monsters Inc. with the hazmat suits and things like that. Yeah, just a lot of like precautions with that. Would disturb bats in the wintertime. But guano is a big one that I wouldn't recommend putting like underneath bat boxes, just because spores can still survive in the summer. Yeah.
So first I want to just put a shameless plug. If you want to help with any bat monitoring or research, at 500 Metro Parks we do emergent surveys on some bat houses. And Rue is right there. She can use that effort. Hey, talk to her. If you want to get involved in that. And then a question for you, Kaya. I don't think you mentioned it, and if I missed it, but can you just touch on some of the rumors surrounding bats carrying rabies and maybe what to do?
Yeah.
Bat safely if they do get into your house.
Yeah, so yeah, it's not, can't pretend they don't have rabies, but the conception of, you know, all bats are rabid is not the case. But if you aren't vaccinated, it is never a good idea. You never know. It's just like any wild species. It's the same thing with some mice that you don't want to pick up their droppings, or be careful with things like that, because you can get mice honta, but I'm not butchering the name. I think it's histoplasmosis that you can get from guano. So they're just precautions you have to take. And if ever you have bats in your house, things like that, you know who to call. It's not surprising when I usually, at some point throughout the semester, I'm gonna text from my professor or some person who's just like, I have a bat. I'm like, all right, I'm going to date you. But yeah, any information is always helpful, and that's something too that we would like to have on that Bats and Buildings platform, that it's collectively all of these types of resources in one centralized place. Even things like how you would, because guano is a fantastic fertilizer, it's called black gold, it's very valuable too. But just like information like that, it's readily available to people. Yeah.
So if you were to say, find just like one or two on the side of a building, like this time of year during migration, would you want that information as well, or?
Any and all of it.
I got you.
Yeah.
State Museum the other day.
Yeah. Yeah, we're actually actually, Joe texted me, I think 2 days ago, from Cincinnati. He's coming from the parking garage after giving a lecture, and he found a red bat on the sidewalk, just hanging out. And they're migrating or moving around this time of year, but we've also gotten reports with silver-haired bats in really tall structures, like on Columbus. I think they're going to Springfield.
So do you want that information sent directly to you, or do you kind of nitpick and look through ag naturalist submissions and stuff like that?
Directly would be the best. Yeah, it's cool, because basically a lot of this, like you might hear, there's some stuff we've done, primarily Joe. Public speaking usually makes me always in. And he's done a lot of radio interviews, things like that, and ODNR's put out a lot of flyers. But yeah, and the email's the best way. I was giving my phone number and then realized quickly that there's a lot of things and people. Yeah, but down the road, I think that'd be great for our platform to actually have a number by just giving you those. Yeah.
What's the weirdest or quirkiest behavior you've observed with the
PG one is. We're recording. I would say you see a lot of different, big or little browns are really tough. I mean, there's one that we caught at one of our hibernacula that he's missing like half of his face, and he must be the boss. You see that? Sometimes you see the wing tips, or the tips of the ears off of them. Yeah, and the weirdest, well, there's a lot of weird ones, but I think northerns, just with whatever they pick as roosts, sometimes you're just like, oh, this whole forest, this is what you pick. Yeah, there's one site that's actually named Boot Cracks. It was a guy who moved, and it's just in this dried creek bed in Pennsylvania for my master's, and it ended up being like a hibernacula, which is crazy. Yeah, you kind of you never know. Like, and just the sheer numbers, especially when you're swarming, in swarming season, sometimes you get a couple bats and then you blink and it's raining bats, which makes me really happy. Yeah.
I read somewhere one time, and it might have been wrong, that some bats have trouble taking flight from the ground. So, is that true, and what should you do? Should you find a bat on the ground?
I would, leave it, or if it's something like in the water, a lot of people recommend put structures where it can crawl out. But even if they can't immediately fly off the ground, there could be things they can crawl up in. But that's actually something that I'm really interested in with pups, like in these building roosts. Because whether it's other bats or whether it's just a hot day or just an accident, because infants are clumsy, you know, they do tend to drop down, and I want to look at how often they're recovered, and things they do. One really cool thing I saw with some landowners north of here, in their hay loft, they had a bunch of bats, and they put old bedding linen on their hay to protect it. But I noticed that the pups were starting to crawl up it. So I'm kind of interested in things like that. That help, but I'd say any adult bat is not uncommon for them to bounce back up. One that I'd be really curious with is the tricolor bats, just because they're so small and so awkward and goofy. But there's also the eastern small-footed bat, which is about the size of tricolored bats that roost in like talus slopes and stuff. So every night we're having straight from the ground. Yeah.
Do that species like intermingle, like can you find like a tricolor and a little brown bat in the same area? Or is it like very territorial where they don't want any other type of bat around there? Like,
So as far as territorial, I don't know. There could be, but not that I am aware of. But there is diversity definitely in our winter sites where you can have a couple species. But as far as the roosts, tree roosts, I'd be surprised. Buildings, I don't think it's out of the question, especially for big and low browns. But things like Indiana bat, they're usually congregated in 1 or 2 roosts in a really ephemeral looking like bark. I don't think they would produce with other species. But yeah, in the wintertime you see it a lot. Historically, you see it.
The roosts are sexually segregated, right?
Sometimes. Some of our research is starting to show, like with their first maternity colony for little browns, that there are a bunch of males there. But yeah, primarily it's supposed to be female dominant. There is some old literature that suggests that you might have a non-reproductive colony of females and might intermingle with males. There's also an event towards the end of the summer where the maternity colonies, they call it break up, which just means they get smaller in size and maybe more spread out. And there's one citation that I was reading that talks about that I think males might drive them out. I haven't seen that in a lot of literature, but I've seen it mentioned once.
So because temperature changes sound waves, how does that impact echolocation?
I don't know.
Do you know of what the main concerns are with how climate change will impact bat populations?
Yeah, I think like the natural resources like water, vegetation, things like that, and it could alter the microclimate within the roost. But with echolocation, that's blowing my mind right now. We drive it home, just thinking about that.
Let's just know if like part of why I know the insects thing is an important part of why they don't go places in winter, but I wonder if also if they got separated somehow, if they find their way easily.
So
Sound travels differently than
there's been some cruel, I don't condone this in today's world, some cruel older research methods and trials.
So never know rules.
Yeah, eyeballs were removed from big brown bats and they were dropped from random places and they weren't able to find their way home, which is crazy. Yeah, that sounded crappy.
Say that again. What'd you say? No,
No,
what'd she say?
Yeah, so there was old research methods, probably 60s, for bats' ability to home. Where the eyeballs were removed, I think of it, and they dropped them in random locations, and they were still able to navigate and find their way home. Yeah. Today's world, I really.
That's not something people do anymore.
Yeah.
That's why we have review boards at universities now.
We got eyes.
Interesting. We got time for one more question.
When I'm sitting on the deck out back in the summer and I see the bats flying over, what bats are we likely looking at?
So they're coming
I
from.
mean, they're big enough to see, so
A big brown.
probably the big browns.
When in doubt, big brown at all. Yeah, but you never know. Like, I'm not ashamed to say, every time we find a little brown colony, I will just bawl my eyes out because there's very few far in between. You never know.
You can get one of those little red doodads and put it in your.
Yeah, no, we put a bat box out, but 2 bats in a truck isn't showed up yet.
There's one of our sites that we believe was the biggest big brown colony for part of our building research. It's a whole barn just covered. Like there's one on Japanese, which was
We rented a farmhouse at one point and had a barn. It's since been torn down, but I remember back now, I went in that barn one time looked up and I'm like, oh, it's crap. But it was really cool.
Yeah, but like at that site, there's a bunch of just old beaten up bat boxes that are covered with wasps. I checked it in the spring to see bats in there, and I kind of checked it on a limb a month ago, and there's no rats in there. And I just saw one of the bats I did, and he's like, hey. So, yeah, like, never failed to surprise you.
Well, let's give her a hand.